Can you tell me a little bit? You mentioned, the Roberts Court, and you mentioned Citizens United. For people, they kind of hear Citizens United, but they don't exactly know what that means. Could you tell us a little bit about Citizens United?
Yes. In 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a partisan 5-4 decision with Republican justices um, striking down campaign finance rules, we entered a new era in American politics. And so that decision was brought by a group that calls itself Citizens United. I actually think the case should be called Billionaires United because that was the true beneficiary of that ruling. That was a 5-4 ruling where we now know that Clarence Thomas cast the deciding vote. He's a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. And he did so even though his wife had just received $500,000 from Harlan Crow, a super rich billionaire in Texas, to fund her group that was poised to take advantage, a new group that she was creating that was poised to take advantage of the ruling to come. Clarence Thomas even had the audacity in that decision to issue a concurring opinion claiming that disclosure would chill the spending of money without disclosing to the American people that he and his family were beneficiaries of this billionaire's largesse because Jenny was going to pay her salary out of part of that $500,000 for a group called Liberty Central. So that ruling was extraordinary. Just a few years earlier, before John Roberts was confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme Court had upheld the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act that many people
Mhm.
know as McCain-Feingold. That was a measure that was adopted in the early 2000s on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by President George W. Bush, a Republican, because there had been this surge in sort of outside money, dark money that was starting to seep into the elections. There had actually been a congressional investigation in 1997 because Charles Koch, it turns out, had funded sort of a trial balloon of dark money to try to capture the delegation to Congress from Kansas. At the time, there were no subpoenas issued, and it was only discovered later through a whistleblower that that effort was funded by the Koch money. But that was just 1990, the 1996 election. So if you look back just a few decades ago, the campaign finance laws that were adopted in the 1970s were holding. Money had to be disclosed. The amount of money that could be donated was limited. As that started to erode, Congress stepped in on a bipartisan basis to try to stop that and have common sense rules like if you're going to spend a big amount of money on ads right before an election, you should reveal who the major sources of those donors are. That was upheld by a Supreme Court, and then there was a change in personnel on that Supreme Court.
Mhm.
After John Roberts and Sam Alito got on the U.S. Supreme Court in 2010, they took up BICRA, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, again. And that time they ruled against it. And they found that it was unconstitutional by basically rewriting our First Amendment to protect this sort of dark money being spent by outside groups under the claim that it would not corrupt or influence the beneficiaries. Well, now we've seen that dark money surge over these past several elections, including in state Supreme Court races. But now we've seen in this most recent election cycle almost the sort of pardon me. Now we've seen in this most recent election cycle sort of a peak of it where you had one man, the richest person in the entire world, the billionaire Elon Musk, spending hundreds of millions of dollars himself to single-handedly try to hand the White House to Donald Trump through spending in Pennsylvania and other states. And so that's partly disclosed because of some of the money that has to be disclosed through PACs, but there's no limit on the amount of money that can be spent. In previous cycles, there were limits on how much money a person could give to a party, a candidate, or to an aligned and coordinated PAC. Now you have this sort of coordination that's happening or tacit coordination that's happening in ways that I think are really problematic and ultimately really need to be reformed.